Hi, everyone. So excited to be here on this beautiful Wednesday, especially in Colorado. And I'm so blessed and honored to have Dave Snell with us and Jason Gerardo. And we're really focused on helping people in important transition events, primarily career, but it also transfers and applies to so many other adjustments that people continually have to work for. With that said, change is the key word. Chat's wide open. We depend on chat to stay as relevant as we can. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Dave. Dave can give you a little freshen up on who he is, what he does a little bit, and what his first thoughts on change are.
Hey, thanks, Don. Good to see you, Jason, as well. If you want me, I will give a quick background. I'm a retired military officer, Navy for 20 plus years, as a cryptologist and surface warfare officer for just a little bit of my career. And now I'm a security investigations professional doing cybersecurity private investigation work. But I'm always up on how to help veterans, help people in general with their resumes transitioning, changing their perspectives and courses in their lives, having gone through mental health path myself and dealing with that. And change to me is something that is an ever constant that we, as I was thinking about this the last couple of days with my daughter, 15-year-old daughter I have, that she's going through changes. I'm not talking physical, I'm just talking through school and through classwork and changing semesters and courses that she changed from one semester to the next, and she had to adapt. And how do we adapt to that change? What do we need to change in our mindset to make the transition smoothly? Really is an impactful perspective change that we have to focus on. We can't just say, oh, well, change is going to come. Well, how do we approach it mentally, physically? What do we do day to day to adapt to what's going on around us?
That's so important because everybody is facing more changes faster than ever before. And a lot of people are getting left behind or holding on to the past instead of embracing the future. To your example of your daughter, reminds me of a guest myself and Beverly had over a week ago, Imogen. And she's just 18 years old. She's already completed 120 podcasts. She's traveled to Malta and picked up some great sponsors. And it's so interesting. Her whole focus was going to medical school. And after doing podcasts, she decided that's not for her because she got a chance to interview so many people in the industry, especially since she's in England. And they told her, don't do it. And now she's just focused. She's still going to go to university this year, but she's going to focus more on what she's already doing. And she actually wrote a post on, the title was Why I'm Not Going to Medical School, and it got 90,000 views on LinkedIn.
Wow.
So, if you were 18 and had her background, and actually it was her father who I had on a show, who's into franchising, knows Harvey, he recommended her. And by the way, she has a 17-year-old sister who's also got her own podcast. So it's just funny how people can embrace change before they have to, or make change when they start to get visibility of what they want. So with that said, Jason, I know you're a man of change and are a catalyst for other people's ability to change. What's your initial thoughts and a little introduction on your part?
Well, good morning, everyone. A lot of good information there, and I'm like writing down notes like, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. I'm excited to be here with you this morning. Yes, as you said, my name is Jason Gerardo. My company is One Path Coaching. I help people kind of really figure out what their path is and how to get on it, and then how to achieve their goals and living their purpose. I think that's kind of what we're all here to do. So I help people with that in different ways. But in the context of the conversation, some points that really stuck out for me. The one thing I want to say about change is that having a flexible and curious mindset, just being open to what's next. I always tell people the universe is ever expanding. Why would we shrink? You know, we tend to close down, especially as we get older too. Sometimes that does come up, not always necessarily, but that is something that we seem to go on that cycle. And it's like we're going against nature because nature's always expanding and always growing. I mean, if you look outside, I'm not sure. I mean, I know where you two are at, but like even for me here in California, everything's growing. You know, it's the season for it, and everything's growing, and it's time to take that action. And we all have those times in our lives to take that action too. Something that you're talking about, the image, and that's something else that I wanted to talk about, is that it's wonderful that she's on that path and she's having success and she's going great. That is amazing. And I think one of the things that's in there that we can all, that's a point that I kind of think about a lot, is her father, maybe all of her parents, but you just had mentioned her father because he's on the show, is into marketing and stuff, and I know he's very supportive. And that's very key. If some people don't feel that support or realize that they have that support because it's not right in front of their face, such as an adult and a parent or something like that. But we are made to change, we are made to grow, and we are supported in that in one way or another. So I'll open up with that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, you know, there's a difference between going with the flow and fighting the tide. And so many people want to hold on to the past, you know, for longer than they should. And then I get intimidated by embracing the future. So they're kind of frozen in time.
Right.
And the world waits and time waits for no one. So whether you're ready or not, it's coming. How do you deal with it? And really how committed you are to be a better person, to show that you're evolving, that you're accessible, open to change, and actually desire change, right, and get comfortable with it, because it's one step at a time. You know, it's not a major thing, but it's an important thing over time. And I think if people just make small adjustments, right, keep their minds open to new ideas, makes a huge difference. I know today we've got Carrie. Carrie's here quite a bit. Real jokester. The world has changed. Now just need my wallet. You got to read into some of those things. Harvey's here. You know how I feel about Harvey. One of the best connections and colleagues on LinkedIn. One of the most persistent, hardest workers on LinkedIn, and has his franchise show on Tuesday and another show he just launched on Thursday, which is focused on franchise brand stories, where the first show is mostly on franchisers. So it shows the ability to build on what you have. And that's another thing about change, is people don't focus on one thing. They start getting enamored by the shining object over there, the grass is greener over there. They spread themselves so thin that they can't really make an impact. And then they have to come back to center if they can. But that's where shows like this, that's where people like Dave and Jason, myself, Harvey come in, is we can help you. And that's the beauty of it. In the past, most people were isolated, alone, you know, didn't have access to information, didn't have access to people, especially if in your rural areas, situations like this. Now the world's everybody's oyster. And all you got to do is listen and believe and trust, then maybe take the step and comment, maybe take the step and appear on a show. But the steps are already in place. You know, it's your movement that's going to make the difference. So with that said, Dave, you know, I know you've been, you know, part of a lot of changes in your life, just like everybody else. What have you learned over time on how to, you know, embrace positive change?
You know, a couple of things I've been thinking about here is, you know, you say I've had lots of changes in my life. And I remember talking to a doc for my first mental episode in the Navy, and I said, I hate change. And she said, well, you joined the wrong career path if you hate change. Because we change every 3 or 4 years, 2-3 years sometimes, you know, in our career path, you know, changing jobs and roles, positions and locations. But at that point, I made a very clear distinction to her, is I don't like change for the sake of change's sake.
Right.
You get a new boss who comes in and says, well, we need to change so I make it mine. Well, that's not really change for the real effect of progress. It's just for change's sake. So there needs to be a purpose behind our change. There needs to be a direction in which we're going, a meaning behind it. And it ties very in closely. I wrote down your comment earlier, and I just thought of this connection just now is, go with the flow or fight the tide. Well, going with the flow, you can change as you're going with the flow. You don't have to make any overt action on your own. Okay, well, this is where we've been going. I'm just going to keep going with you. And it may be a little different than what I've normally done, but it's not a radical change for change's sake. And there's a big difference, I think, in our mindset we have to make of why are we making the change we want to make? Is it for the greater good? Is it for ego? Is it, what's the reason behind it? And, I found that as I progressed in my career after the comment from the doc, I could accept change. I adapted to what was going on, and it was going with the flow. Okay, hey, I understand why you're making the change because there was purpose and meaning behind it. Every 2, 3 years, 4 years, I had to change jobs. Okay, because I'd grown in that position. Someone else needed a turn. Someone else came in, they saw something was wrong, or maybe the dynamics had changed externally to our organization that I didn't see because I was wed to it. Okay, when we start communicating these processes behind change, it makes it a lot easier for people to accept.
Those are excellent points. And the other thing that comes to mind is change that happens because of people around you, right? Relationships tend to prosper or fail based on the inability to keep up with each other's progress and change, right? So if you're growing, you're learning, you're embracing, and the people you're with, a family member or a business partner or whatever relationship isn't, you're going to start having a bigger and bigger gap. And the question of change really comes down to a lot of times when it's support, right? When me and my wife went to Weight Watchers, we did it together. We lost 40 pounds in 20 weeks together, but we were looking at each other all the time and reminding each other, well, do you really need that extra slice or that dessert? And you would think no, and you'd put your fork down. But if you were with somebody who wasn't part of that, let's say, endeavor, and start eating pepperoni pizzas every time and telling you how good they were, how could you keep holding on to your commitment? And I think that's so essential, is to include people, to make them aware, I'm going to have to go to school for a while, or I'm going to have to do this in order to become a better person. And, it's those people who say, okay, it's your turn. I'll get behind you. And that builds somewhat of an obligation or commitment to say, well, when you want to make the next change, I'll be there for you. And then you can ratchet up together and feel good about it, and also when you have results, who is your fan club? Or who, I remember as a kid, I come home with a good report card. It was never good enough.
Yeah.
So no matter what I did, I was always smarter than I'm showing myself. I'm always this. After a while, you stop showing report cards because you know what the result is. And no one intended that way, but people weren't that with it. Harvey comes back with a large one. Great topic, career transition, such as an important topic. We have to continually reinvent ourselves. I had a major career change in 2022 after 25 years of being in commercial kitchen design and sales. I realized I wanted to work closer with people, and found an opportunity in franchising. Thanks to Don, my friends here in LinkedIn Live, I managed to become a thought leader in franchising just by being curious, lifting others up, and just taking that step. And, change is so easy when it's not just on your shoulders, right? I'd rather be one person in 10 that is collectively working together, supporting each other. And that's actually what we do on our every other Thursday Zoom meetings is everybody puts their cards on the table, shares what I learned this week, what I'm about to do, who my great guests are, and you get to pick and choose, and you can ratchet up together so much faster. Plus, when you're not alone, it gets a lot easier, because that's another challenge with people. They think they're the only ones with the issue. They get embarrassed, they get ashamed, they start to hide things a little bit, and they become authentic, and it shows. And, examples like Harvey, who's now been listed as one of the top 100 influencers in franchising, has one of the major expositions in franchising sponsoring him. And he's only been at it 11 months. So no one's saying, hey, I'm an icon, I'm a legend, I'm anything more than, hey, I bring people together for a quality subject and I empower and promote them. And I think it's the facilitators who really exert a lot of influence and power in other people's change. Dennis says, agree, change is good, don't spare it, but share it when you can help others. And, Dennis is a prime example of being in the same business that he founded 49 years ago.
Wow.
And one can say, well, geez, haven't changed much in 49 years. And, heating and air conditioning will be here forever. But the point is I'm sure Dennis had to reinvent his business and himself every 6-7 years, because the business he started 49 years ago wouldn't be relevant today. And sometimes it's harder to change what you're into than to change what you'd like to be into. And how many people, if you look at their resume, every year is a new job. And what it tells you is either they picked wrong, or they just couldn't fit, or they couldn't commit to something long enough when it became a little more challenging. Another comment by Dennis says, when you're a smart kid, you reduce kidding and stay honest. I believe it. So Jason, a lot here for a lot of people to hear and maybe benefit from.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point about Dennis being in his business for so long, so I watched my grandfather, obviously not in the beginning, because he's passed, but he sold Ozobills and had his own garage, had a 6-car stall garage from 1947 to 1986. If you think he didn't have to change a lot within that same business between those years, you don't know about cars, because the cars changed, technology changed, and he had to update it, he had to change it. People's tastes change. There's so many things that even within that business, you have to always be, you can't say static, but anything we do, right? It's like static water. You don't want to drink from a pool that's of static water or still water. You want that flowing water to keep things fresh. Something that you had mentioned and something that's coming up is community. And if anyone's ever seen me on any show or any of my talks, community is what I talk about, because it is so important. You go so much farther together. Being the tip of the spear is a challenge. When you feel it, if you feel that you're alone, you're not alone, like we talked about, but it's easy to feel that way. And it's great to have a sounding board, someone you could say to, and not just to say, oh, you're doing great, and not just to challenge you. It's that flex, as you were talking about, Don. You want to get that attaboys, attagirls, as it were, and also have those people in your community that can say, that's not working. You think it is, or maybe you're afraid to change, or whatever. However that conversation goes within that relationship, right? Some people can just say, that sucks, man, change it. Or some people might be a little more delicate. It depends on where you're at with your relationship with them, and it all works. Having that biggest fan. My wife is my biggest fan. My wife for years, I did 26 years in retail leadership, and talking about change within that. I built stores, I closed stores, I area managed, I was part of an HR team, I was a trainer, doing different things to keep me invested, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do. And it's a tough, if you've ever worked in it, it's a tough gig. It's really hard. And I know, Don, I know you're very familiar with that world. And I would come home some days just challenged. And the goal was always for me to do what I do now, coaching, healing, helping others. But I always put it off. And I would come home some days for some just rough days, and my wife would say, how many more signs from the universe do you need to make that change? You know, that's the point of community. That's the point of having of someone that's your fan, is they can tell you stuff like that. They can say, hey, you're doing good, or hey, it's time to shift. And our job is to listen. Our job is to take that in and do what's best for us within what we think and what we believe, and be able to take that counsel.
Yeah, and I think a good rule of thumb is happiness and satisfaction. Some people do really good financially, but at what point is it expensive, right? To your relationship, to your future. Sometimes you know you're on a dead end, but you haven't reached it, and you want to milk it as much as you can, or even avoid what comes next.
Right.
So
Can I jump in real quick on that one? Because it's very ironic, because every couple of Wednesdays I have brunch with a couple of mates down at the Egg Bistro down the street here. And just this morning, not 3 hours ago, we had the very same conversation. People asked me, Dave, why don't you have a full-time job? Why aren't you working 40 plus hours a week? Why aren't you making X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars? And I said, why? So I can come home and be miserable, or I can worry about the next, every day worrying about things. Happiness, your word just triggered that for me. And I'm jumping on this very quickly, because I wasn't happy when I was working 40 hours a week for somebody else, and for a time clock that was somebody else's requirement, not my own. And it took away from my time with my family, my community, to your point, Jason, my people that were supporting me. I was neglecting them, my daughter in particular, my family, my parents, my wife, my kids, whatever, even my friendships, even my neighbors. I wasn't able to help them because I'm focused on this. I wasn't happy. So I jumped on a change where I said, I'm going to work for myself. I don't know what that means, and I don't know what it is I'm going to do. And I just kind of fell into, well, I've got this background with investigations in the sense of intelligence work, of solving a problem, of using computers and cyber work that I've done in security. And I became a private investigator. I haven't made a whole lot of money doing it yet, but I'm happy. I have my retirement and disability, so that helps. But I have a spouse who said, you're miserable. Why are you going into work every day? Okay, well, good call. Well, let me make a note of that. I'll write that down. And I said, I resign. I think it was 2 days later, I just dropped my resignation. And a weight lifted, the metaphorical weight off your shoulders is, oh my gosh, I can breathe. I know there's an end to this madness of why am I here? And now I've been able to, as a result, during the pandemic, I looked at what was making me unhappy, happy, whatever. And I said, okay, I can help others. And that's how, Don, you and I got connected. I said, I want to go into sharing my experiences while also maintaining this, through our collaboration group, which has been very helpful. Where's my path leading me? And it's been very helpful. So I wanted to jump on that before I forgot.
No, I think that's an extremely valuable point. I sure appreciate that, because except for having a job when I was 15, I've always had my own business. Not always been that profitable, but it's been mine. And there's a point of taking back control. How many times have people worked for people that they wouldn't even hire to work for them?
Yeah.
Right? And all of a sudden you got to swallow a little bit more. You got to accommodate. And pretty soon you're not yourself to succeed, right? You know when to say something, when not, what's going to be accepted, what isn't. And I've always adopted that philosophy. If it's going to be, it's up to me, right? I'm not waiting for the cavalry to show up. I'm not hoping for divine intervention, even though I'm always hoping that it may come. But, the other thing is peace of mind, knowing you're doing the best you can with what you have. And, if you can get over the hump, it'll serve you forever. Because then, hey, I'll take responsibility and accountability for my success and for my failures, and I'll learn from them. And, everybody likes an independent person. Everybody likes a person who's strong, can take control, and also accept their weaknesses in front of everybody and say, I'm working on these things, because life is a work in progress. Careers are a work in progress. And sometimes you learn more on the way down than you learn on the way up. And I think that's so important, because it really gives you humility, makes you humble, makes you appreciate things that so many people take for granted, who have either had a great pampered childhood, but then they're left alone like an orphan in the woods when it comes time to take control. And, it is, what did you leave behind that is your legacy? No one really cares how much money you got in the bank, and you can't take anything with you. And at a certain point in life, things don't mean as much as relationships. How many cars do you need? How big of a house do you really want to live in? And people compete with themselves for some reason, either competing with the Joneses and keeping up with the neighborhood. When we bought our first house, we never left it. I mean, and it was the same neighborhood, and we were happy there, because the key to that house was the neighbors.
Right.
We just had a beautiful group all around us, that everybody had their doors open. Everybody was in and out of everybody's places in a good way. And then ultimately my daughter bought it. So when I go there, I go back to the house I bought 44 years ago. And some things are worth holding on to: tradition, family, things of that nature. So you have to make wise choices when you decide, when you're at the fork on the road, how is this going to serve more than what's on the surface, right? I always told people when they came to work for me, it's not how much you make here, it's who you become here, because that's what's going to take you forward. With that said, I want to recognize Dean LeBay. Dean was with us from the beginning. Just a wonderful gentleman, has a miracle story of when he was told he'd never walk again, and he's walking now. Awesome. He's more involved than ever before. He's an inspiration for so much of us, and his logo is the potato, and there's a story behind that, and that's why he posts that. So there is something to reconnecting and continually see people over time that you thought might have gone off on their own, but some people never leave. They just take a little bit longer to come back. So Jason, what's your new thoughts?
So I'd like to say, the way the conversation went, and just the way kind of we talk and who the three of us are, that I want to say this isn't an entrepreneur show. This isn't a small business show. There's a place for everybody, and it depends on what in life, but in for this conversation, in career, what your values are, what's important to you. I'm going to come back to that, because I want to make another point first. So with that in mind, there's a place working for other people, for people. There is a place for jobs. I'll be very, very honest here. My wife works for a big tech company, and that's why I'm blessed to be able to do what I'm doing. She makes what she makes, and it supports us, and it supports me and my business. And so I believe there is definitely a place for that. And, but within that, there's still room for change too. You don't necessarily have to go out on your own to make that change. Paul Zane Pilsner, a world-class economist, worked for been in the White House and stuff over years. And he talks about the 51% rule. And he says, if you're in a job or a career, well, let's say a job, doing something, a task basically. And he says, when you are doing the job more than 50% and learning less than 50%, it's time to change. And that change doesn't mean go to another company necessarily. It might be look for another position. It might be take some classes. It might be just something like that. So you can definitely change within an organization and keep growing within an organization. Because, I always used to say, like, for me working in stores, like I started off as a cashier, basically, right out of the Marine Corps. And then I quickly moved up, because my belief is always, why sweep floors if you could run the business? And that was my mindset. That was and I knew I could run the business. And so, we take those steps, we make those moves, and that's part of my values, what's important to me. So I do want to talk about that. So, we're talking about, how sometimes money might not be top of your values. But if you're in a position like a lot of people are, and I think we all are too, to an extent, is you got those bills to pay, right? So where does that fall in your values? If money is your most important thing, you might struggle. I think we've all been there. I mean, we're all a little bit older, and I think when we were younger, that might have been the journey. You want to get it done, you want to make it happen, you want to build it, you want to grow it, you want to make $1 million. So I think it's a little higher. And then as you go along, and to Dave's point, man, I'm not home. I'm not seeing my family. I'm not seeing my community. I wish that, and not everyone can, but everyone can. You have to find what works for you, and you have to do it. It's just about being strategic. You don't just, Dave's in a position that he was able to put that notice in 2 days. Not everyone's in that position, and that's okay. But recognizing where you're at and recognizing where you want to go and how are you going to get there, that's that path. And I think we all can take that look at where we're at in our lives and say, hey, this is where I'm at. This is where I want to go. What do I need to do? And then take that first step.
And that's so terrific and so valuable. I hope people took that to heart, because it isn't an absolute. So you could keep doing what you're doing because you do have to pay the bills. I mean, if your family's your priority, everybody's got to eat, everybody's got to have a place to live. So if you got to bite your tongue a little bit and swallow a little bit deeper, well, that's not a big challenge. But here's the key now. You can transition without giving up what your primary income is. Strategically, and I think that's a key word. You could say, this is not going to take me where I want to go, but it's paying the bills. So why don't I take the time after work, take a class, get online, join groups like this, and find a way out that makes for an easier transition. No one should get personal about things, especially when it's professional. People take things to heart, usually feel bad, and that really works against somebody.
Right.
My daughter's in cybersecurity, and she has 3 side hustles going on, right? And some of it is just, she founded the food pantry at the school. She volunteered to be PTA president for 3 years. She helps out at the shelter for animals. And she also has some side gigs where she picks up some additional income. And the other thing is when you're in different arenas, no one arena is all or nothing.
Right.
So if you have 2 or 3 pursuits, it could be something that's, again, more contributing to the community, or it could be something, hey, I pick up another $300-400 a month, and I love doing it. It makes you a better whole person, and it shows when you go to work. If all you do is work and watch dumb TV, how is that going to serve anybody? And what you do, people follow you, right? And that's why people who go to theater all the time are into theater together. There used to be that saying, the family that does this does that.
Right.
And I think that's so important, because there are things that won't change and shouldn't change. The value you put on family and friends, the way you present yourself. They always say it's your music, not your words. When you show up and you're happy and you're positive, people get attracted to that because they don't have enough of it. So you're also the example and the catalyst for other people's change. And that could make a difference. I can't tell you over the last 2 years how many messages I received that because of a show, because of something, it made them hang out one more day in their business or not do something dramatic.
Right.
And sometimes you never know what your words are going to do for so many people. And shows like this will continue to be seen by people we'll never meet, know, or appreciate, but our message continues to ring loud and clear. And I think that's something that's a feather in everybody's hat, because if you can help others, you can be helped, because if they can do it, you can do it. Sometimes it's just a matter of who's going first. And why not celebrate people's successes? In this day and age, there's so much adversity. There's so much conflict. There's so much what I loved about the eclipse is everybody could agree it was an amazing event, right? It wasn't political, it wasn't anything else, and that's how it used to be. Somebody'd win the World Series and everybody get excited and be on the same team. And I think that's where we need to get back to, is community, is putting aside, in my opinion, a lot of small differences and building on the major value systems that we used to have. So coming back to Dave.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts that crossed my mind as we were talking here, and your comment about choice. And everything we're talking about is what is your choice? What do you choose to do with your life? What do you want to have an accomplishment or state of your career, your personal life, your health, your body, your appearance, whatever it is? We're making choices. And whether that choice is to stay the same, to go with the flow, just the way you were, I don't want to say stuck in the past, because you're still moving forward. You just accept where you are today. That's a choice. You accept where you are and you have adapted. The other word that really comes to my mind is I fear that people make comparisons too much. And the reason I say that too is, to your point, Jason, is some people would say, well, Dave, that was really lucky that you could do that, just like you did, where you changed your career path. Look, yes, I have a disability payment from the government, a retirement, but I also have my wife who has her full-time job. But you know what she does? She has 2 side hustles herself in real estate, 2 paths in real estate. So we're making choices, but we're not always seeing all the details behind them. So comparison is as I just told my daughter, I always go back to my daughter because she's my greatest teacher. And I always have these opportunities to reflect and give back to her and learn from it as she gives me these opportunities. Is comparison is our greatest thief of joy. Right. I've had the opportunity to make that choice to change my career path because of the choices I'd made throughout my life, right, that put me in this position. Not everybody's going to be in the same position. You're absolutely right, Jason. The point is to get to the point where you can make those choices, to have that freedom, right? Not because I'm comparing myself to somebody else, but because it's what I want to do and what I'm able to do. Right. So change is an internal function as well. I mean, we mentioned external earlier. Internally, I don't want people to think, oh, I have to change because someone else is ahead of me, or I don't have to change because they're behind me. Change is an internal function as well. What do you want to change about yourself? Don, you and your wife weren't happy with your appearance or your health or whatever it was. I need to change a dynamic. And this is the same thing for me. December 28th, 2019, I hit over 200 pounds. I was a little bit over. And I said, I need to change. Something internally drove me to say, what am I going to do? I didn't compare myself to my old boss who lost 100 pounds or 50 pounds himself, and he was running a lot. I said, what do I want to change? What do I need to do? So comparison is our greatest thief of joy. And when we look at our internal issues, where do we want to be? Change is an internal function with some externals. I know I'm just trying to focus on the internal right now. So those are the 2 key words that I just picked up on in my head as we've talked over the last few minutes.
Those are very important points. And timing and positioning is everything when it comes to change, right? There's things you need to change. You're just not ready for it. It's not that compelling, right? I can name 100 things I could do better, and I know I could, but it's not the right time for me at this time. And that's why other people decide to do something, found a way to want to make that change, because the key to change is commitment to continuous change. How many people go on a diet? I mean, January is the best example. The health clubs get all these new memberships, the diet programs because people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they said, I'm going to do something about it, but they don't have the support in place. It's like planning a big car trip and you don't fill the gas up. How far are you going to get? And again, is your support there? I wouldn't quit a job without telling everybody, here's what I'm about to do, because that's the last thing I want to do is come home. Hey, honey, I quit my job. I'm going to write a book. Right? I mean, that's great. Do you got enough money in the bank? Do you have something lined up? The other thing is what someone's purpose for you doesn't have to be your purpose for yourself. Right? A big company will hire you hoping you stick around for 20 years, and you say, I'm just here for the next 2-3 years. I'm going to do whatever I have to do, generate whatever income I need. And with that money in the bank, I'm going to be able to move forward on my own. So, sometimes the end is the means and vice versa. And I think that's so important. So being yourself, being comfortable with who you are. And if you're not, make the change then, because there's so many people who get sick because they just can't keep up on that rat race. They can't keep playing that role that really doesn't fit them anymore. With that said, I want to introduce Beverly. Beverly has been with me partnering every Tuesday on the Women's Empowerment event. I will say one thing for Beverly, just like I mentioned with Harvey. Beverly is the most professional person I've gotten to know on LinkedIn, one of the most supportive colleagues. And that speaks a lot because people hardly know most of the people they're connected to on LinkedIn. And until you get to go, shoulder to shoulder with someone and work together and see who they really are over time and how generous they are in their support and also how confident they are. I always go back to a gentleman I had on a few times, and basically every time he's on, he's always focused on the other people. He's hardly, focused on himself. And the beauty of it is people get to see you on how you treat other people. And that builds your reputation more than the person who says, I'm great, I do this, I do that. Maybe they do. But what they're talking about is I versus we, being part of the group and supporting each other, because that sometimes takes that proactive approach. Everybody's holding back until someone lets go, right? And then all of a sudden they decide, hey, I can let go. And letting go of things that don't work is so essential to change too. Well, Beverly's impressed, but it's true. I've been around so many people over my career, and some things you just continue to relate to, like, hey, Jim is acting just like John did 6 years ago. I'm starting to put them in that, let's say, category. And other people, you just know they just are just mature. They have evolved. And they continue to grow and change, just like Harvey, just like Dave. I mean, and the other thing about change is until you've been able to see it over time, you don't recognize it. I know when you have kids, all of a sudden they grow up, but you only saw them every day. When you take them to their grandparents, it's like, wow, you've grown 4 inches, or you're that much smarter. And I think that's so important. And, the other thing is to reserve judgment, because just like empowering people with positive support, you never know what an unkind word will say. And sometimes you don't even know it was unkind, and you can't take back. They say you can't unring a bell. Once it's come out, it's there. And if you, in a moment of anger or emotion, you were to say, hey, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard of, or you're this and you're that, some of that sticks, right? And you don't even know that. So you got to be very careful and thoughtful, especially in people who are in sensitive situations, challenging situations. What they need is a kind ear, a shoulder they can lean on. That's what they're looking for. They don't want advice. They already know. You don't have to talk to a really heavy person and say, I think you would be better served to lose some weight, or a person who's afraid of flying and say, hey, no one, the chances of getting hurt at an airplane is less than, getting hit by lightning. They just want to know, hey, you're okay, I'm okay, it'll be okay, I'm here for you. And that's just enough. And sometimes listening is more important than talking. So thank you, Beverly. I hope everybody has the opportunity, like I had, to get to know Beverly. I know she always has 15 minutes of free calls. If anybody wants to talk, get to know her. And I think that's extremely generous. So, Jason, it seems like before we know it, an hour's up and we have just scratched the surface. What's your new thoughts?
A couple of different things I want to touch on that you had mentioned, talking about, watching your kids grow up and then the grandparents see them, oh my goodness, you changed. And it's that the Japanese term kaizen, and it's that continuous growth. It's that, gradual methodical process, getting better in increments all the time, and that's something that we can all do. The other thing I want to mention about Dave's story, and you were talking about choice, Dave, and about how it reminded me of, they say, oh, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success. So to your point, you made all these choices throughout your life to get to that point where you're able to do that, and I wasn't saying you were making you could, but it's a great example, because and I'm glad that you brought it up, because that's people can have that impression. And it's like, to your point, that's a beautiful point. And to Don's point too, it's like, you got, oh yeah, but they've got these side hustles and they've got this other stuff. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes. And that's to another thing, to your point, Don, about having that support, where everyone doesn't see the grind. Everyone doesn't see that I'm on social media all the time trying to make sure I connect with people and stuff like that. And my wife's like, why are you on your phone? Because I'm connecting with people, because I'm doing stuff, because I'm getting emails at 8 o'clock at night. And there's balance. There's times when the phone turns off and it goes away. But there's these little sacrifices. Oh, hey, Saturday I've got this event that I'm going to go to because I need to get in front of the public. Everyone doesn't see all of that. They can just see sometimes the results. So it's great to have people in your camp, so to speak, that know what you go through and know the sacrifices you are making, because you're going to make sacrifices in this life. And it's either a sacrifice for the good or sacrifice for the not so good. And you can decide. You choose. I'm going to work hard. Is it going to be working hard towards this goal? Is it going to be working hard towards something that's not really fulfilling me? And the last thing I want to say is that, we've been talking about going with the flow. And every time today someone talks about flow, I see the metaphor of like a little toy boat going through a river, going down the river. And sorry, my Navy friend, I'm going to use a nautical term here. But Marines go on ships too. Thinking about the rudder, what steers the ship. And if you don't have the rudder is the thing that sticks in the water that kind of directs you. And if you don't have a rudder, you're still going to go with the flow, not where you want to go. You're going to bump against some rocks. You're going to have a rough ride. You're still going to just keep going forward, but you're still not going to be controlled. But that rudder is going to help you control where you do go within that flow, to something that Dave said earlier. So I just want to mention that, we could control where we're going within the context of the bigger picture too.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And again, you don't know what it is to walk in somebody else's shoes. And sometimes their outward appearance is kind of deceiving to their internal feelings and thoughts, especially people who are competitive, people who are success driven. They're much harder on themselves than they should be.
Right.
They don't give themselves as much time to enjoy the little things that maybe don't pay the most, but are the most gratifying. I know with my kids, I'm always sharing that if you never do any more than you've done, you're more than great for me, right? When they went off to college, I said, I don't really care about your grades. I know how smart you are. I don't need someone else to tell me. I just want you to use this experience to get some time to think, some time to get to build relationships with other people, and that's what's important. And, what I found over time is when you're okay, they get more okay with it, and it's
Right.
better to be there to say, no matter what, I'm always going to love you. Wherever I am, you're always going to have a home, food, and whatever you need to sustain yourself. So there's always a backup position if you need it. And I think people like to have that get out of jail card in their pocket. That if all goes wrong, I can take a time out, go to a family, go to friends. And a lot of people are embarrassed because they think reaching out for help is weakness, is the admission of weakness. But you know what? Only healthy people know when they're not healthy and when they need help. It's the people who resist it, who deny it, who try to extend it. And to your point, Jason, they lose their rhythm, right? They lost control. And now it's whatever happens, happens. And that's not a very exciting or satisfying or comfortable position to be in. So I know Dave, just like all of us, have had the experience of life, the ups, the downs. And one thing I'll say is no matter how high you are up on the up, you're going down. And no matter how low you are on the down, you're coming back up if you don't mess with anything. They say, maybe it's not true anymore, but a rocket 98% of the time is off course, right? And until, I forgot the gyroscope puts you back on course. So the idea is you're not going to have a straight line.
Right.
It's not here to there. It's going to be here, pivot there, wait for something there. But that's the adventure of life. That's the fun of life. And knowing what happens to you happens to everybody in a different way. That person who has the big house, the big car, the big this, the big that, always happy, I don't think so, right? And actually feeling sorry for people who missed life. I know people who live in compounds who are just hugely successful. You know what they say? My kids have been rehabbed 3 times. I'm on my 4th marriage. What a price I paid. Because at the end of the day, I actually listened to this Roger Daltrey interview, part of The Who. Mm-hmm. And he's like 11 kids, has been married for like 45 years. And he was quite the guy on the road. And he says, one thing I'll say, my wife is a saint for having to deal with me. But what I'm most proud of, out of his 11 kids, he said, none of them reached my level, and I was happy. One's a beautician, one's a tradesperson. But you know what? Every holiday, they always come back. And they don't have to at this point. And that makes me proud. And I think that's what's important. One last quick story. I used to visit my mother every year for about 40 years. She had a really small condo in Florida. And there was nothing to do there except a pool and a little clubhouse. And I'd hang out in the steam room, and there'd always be some older gentleman. And all they would say is, I remember when I went hunting with my grandson. I remember Thanksgiving. They never said, I got a big bonus in 1967. And after hearing enough of these guys, I said, well, that must be the way it is. So why not adopt that philosophy early and emphasize those little family excursions and those opportunities? So, I think everything is balanced to a point. Everything can be accepted little by little until you get comfortable. It reminds me of people used to come to work for me and they would say, I hate starting at the bottom. And I would say, well, you're only at the bottom as long as you want to be.
Right.
That's where you move from. So, Jason, final thoughts. We've got about 6 minutes to go. Been an exciting conversation.
Yeah, and I love these conversations, and that's this LinkedIn Live is an amazing platform, and thank you for inviting me and having me on here and being with Dave and you and Kelly last time, and it's a great place for us to come and just brain share, get together, and that's what we talked about, community and growth. This is a great opportunity for us to all to come together, and something that you said or something will come in the comments will help spur me. So as I go out the rest of my day today, it'll be there with me, and so I think that's the important part about change and transition and growth is know that there is opportunity always to learn from every experience you have. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's so wise because, it's good to learn from your own mistakes, but it's better to learn from someone else's. And, and when you can share a little bit about your challenges, you become more human to the other people, because everybody thought, well, you were the person, you were the this. I know in high school, there was always that, well, he's the quarterback, she's the this, and you would measure yourself, well, but believe me, they went through high school with their same concerns, with their same challenges. Maybe they were able to put a different face on. But, at another point, I remember going to my mother's 65th high school reunion.
Wow.
And she graduated in 1943, right in the middle of the World War II. 70% of the guys never graduated. They were off to war, and a major percentage of them never came back. And when you hear these stories, and it was a big class, actually her high school stadium had 28,000 seats.
Wow.
It was in Erie, Pennsylvania. Back in the 40s, high school and college sports were the thing. Pro football and that stuff was secondary. And, you realize the sacrifice some of these people made, and you have to realize you're standing on the shoulders of people who came before you, open roads for you, made these sacrifices, and gives you more of a commitment and obligation to, pay back a lot of the people who did that for you. So real quick, we got Omar from Zoom Party. Omar's another great guy. And the funny thing is, you'll never get to realize who people are by just looking at their profile. It's actually being on Omar's show. Omar's been on this show, and the continuous sharing. So Dave, what's your thoughts for the conclusion of our great show today?
I will finish on 2 points. One, Jason, never an offense to a Navy guy. We're happy to be your Uber drivers. And second, the last 15 minutes or so, I'm struggling to remember her name, Don. I'm sure it'll come to you. I'm hoping it does. I've seen her recently on LinkedIn posts. One of the first or second shows I did with you was with a lady who was the butterfly lady.
Oh, yeah, Debbie Clemens.
Debbie, yes. I'm sorry I forgot her name. If you're watching, Debbie, my apologies. But it just drives home to the point, because that first key word we had with her was metamorphosis. And none of us, we've said several times today, none of us are meant to stay the same. We're supposed to change. We're supposed to grow. We're supposed to go into this chrysalis, as she pointed out, and change, whether that's through education, through a community growth, or self-learning by experience. We're supposed to be going through this metamorphosis, making a change in our lives and growing as a result. Crabs, cicadas, they shed their skin. Snakes, God help us, shed skin because they're growing. We got to get rid of stuff to grow. You got to clean your room to make room for something else, so to speak. And that the word has been running in my head the last 15 minutes or so, and just make sure that you're always growing for your own sake, not for somebody else's, and going through that metamorphosis to make yourself happy, not someone else happy.
Yeah, metamorphosis and change are so elemental to your future. And you know what? Again, time and change waits for no one. It's happening. You can't just pause and get ready for it. And the other thing is to appreciate diversity. If you ate peanut butter every meal, how many times could you look forward to it? You could sustain yourself on it. But variety is the spice of life, and knowing that you could do so much better if you choose to. So before, opportunities weren't available to everybody in the same way. Accessibility wasn't available. So many people had to deal with gatekeepers. So many people had to qualify. And in the past and even to the present, there is bias. Ageism is an issue. And there's so many isms. But when you actually have your true voice and people can hear it, it transcends all these superficial challenges, because no matter how old you are, You're only as good as your next thought or your next thing that comes out of your mouth. And the key is to stay relevant. That's important. A genius from 20 years ago shows up with no change. They're already legacy, you know. And one last thing I'll say for our 18-year-old guest, and she made an impact, is how do you bring an 18-year-old on to women's empowerment over 50? You know, and you decide, hey, I'll put my toe in that water, you know, and I'll see what happens. And it was dramatic and it was important. So sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes not being so sure of yourself is a good thing, you know, and measuring yourself. So with that said, I want to thank Jason again, Dave again. I mean, these shows not only continue, but they continue to get better because we know each other pretty well. We know how we've been able to think, relate to each other. And I kind of look at it as a metaphor. If the three of us were just throwing a ball around to each other, you know, and as soon as we got it, we throw it to somebody else and support what they did. It, you know, the audience is gravy. If we had no audience and we had this conversation, it would be worthwhile. But when you get the benefit of leverage, and the other thing is everybody who's on the show, everybody who's on the sidebar is influencers. They're not just audience. They'll take this message and share it. And if they don't share it directly, they'll integrate it into their sayings. I know after 700-800 shows, I've got a little piece of every guest in me. I picked up some quality sayings, some great metaphors, some insight. And, you know, that helps me learn because it just is natural. When you got to read a book and that's boring and it's kind of self-directed versus, hey, I love having conversations. You know, like Dave said, he met for breakfast with a couple friends. And that's where community and that's where people can help each other. So with that said, I want to get everybody on their way. I'm conscious of people's schedules. So thank you so much. Tomorrow we're going to have Kelly, another wonderful individual I've had a chance to get to work with and grow with. And talking again in 23 hours if you're available. So thank you again, Jason. Thank you, Dave.